Well, welcome back this week to an analysis behind the news. I'm going to talk about the Ukraine. I'm going to talk about something that's called the North American Union. And last, what our leaders are trying to do in the way of establishing better ties with China's military. Now, we have to go back in time to understand all three of these things and how they tie together, how they're interrelated. Because the American people are not aware of the tactics at the other side, and by the other side I mean those who are enemies of the United States and the Constitution, and what they've been trying to do through worldwide communism in the United States and everything else to bring about something they call the New World Order. Now, one of the things that you need to do to get a full understanding, or at least the beginning of a full understanding, of the future of the world, if these people succeed, is still the book 1984 by George Orwell. And in that book, he shows that really the scheme was to divide the earth into three portions, all fighting each other sometime or another, with A and B fighting C, or B and C fighting A, but perpetual war to be able to control the people that lived in these regions so that they would be more concerned about the war and fighting in the name of patriotism to save their so-called country than they would be about their own leaders being terrible dictators. But at the top, there was an inner party. In other words, the anti-hero, Winston, in the novel, was part of the ruling party. He did not know that there was a party above the party, just as there's always been a party above the Communist Party. All you have to do is read the forewords written by Frederick Engels of the various editions of the Communist Manifesto, and in there he admits that this was all done by a secret society. At the publication date of the Communist Manifesto, they came out with an open Communist Party, but they retained the covert secret society. Later, Engels tried to convince people that they did away with the secret part, but they never really did, he admitted in another portion of his writings. So there was the party, above that the inner party, and the earth was divided into three, or that was the plan, and that's been the plan since at least 1850. You can find that in a book called The New Rome, written by two German communists who resided in the United States. And the earth would be divided mainly between Russia, the United States, and they said probably China, but they weren't sure. But that would probably be the case. Now then, by the way, they also said that the future war would probably be fought in the air and any number of things of that nature. So the world was to be, divided into three. But they would be controlled at the top. While everybody else at the bottom thought they were fighting one another, at the top they would be working together to actually rule the earth. So that's really what's going on today. How does this tie into the Ukraine? Well, let's talk about one other thing before we get there, and that's this. That there were two basic radical movements in the United States which moved forward from the period of 1820s into present. And they were, one, that we would make the United States into a world empire, that we would formulate a world government through the empire of the United States by constantly expanding the United States. And the other was to be a foil against that through the communists, that they would be against Yankee imperialism and any number of things. They had the same goal, however, of a world empire. And that has always been the goal of these individuals, a one world government, a world parliament, a world court, that sort of thing. That has been their ultimate goal. The regional aspect of it, and smaller regions into larger regions, into three parts of the world, would be the steps until ultimately they just merged it all under one government. Okay, how does that work with the Ukraine? We're told in the Ukraine that the Ukrainians have two choices. They can become part of the European Union, or they can become part of the hemisphere of Russia. Wow, what a choice. Wouldn't you like to have that choice? You can either be part of the socialist European Union or part of the communist Russia. But the problem is that the EU is just as much of a problem as Russia. Don't forget that most countries have been ruled in Europe by socialists of one stripe or another. Western Europe, they were part of the international socialists. Eastern Europe, part of the influence of Russian communism through Moscow. Well, when communism so-called collapsed, these individuals in charge of these communist countries didn't go away. The communist parties didn't go away. They just renamed themselves. And they retained the people that were in the government all along. They just named number 2 or number 3 in the communist apparatus as the leader, and these names were unrecognizable to the West. As a result, they thought they weren't communists when they were ex-communists. And so you have individuals in the Socialist International, controlled, by the way, by communists, and the ex-communists in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, that formulated the European Union. Short story. So this is the apparatus really honestly controlled out of Moscow, whether it's Russia or whether it's the EU. The Moscow Russians control the European hemisphere, if you will. That will become part of the whole third that we're talking about in the plot of 1984. So it doesn't matter whether the Ukraine goes into the EU or whether it gravitates towards Moscow, the end result will always be the same. Even Gorbachev, the last dictator of communist Russia, supposedly, said that the European Union was the new European Soviet. And he went on further to say that ultimately it would be from the Atlantic to the Urals, and it would be controlled by communists. End of story, more or less. So that's the problem, and how Ukraine fits into this. Don't pay any attention to the show business. These poor people in the streets have no idea of what's going on. If this is a spontaneous uprising of the people, who do they have to negotiate this sort of thing? They found plenty of people to negotiate and make it all go away overnight. They made it come out into the streets overnight, and it went away overnight. Well, now the Russian, there's other things in the Crimea, but that's another story. It fits into here, but we won't get into that right now. The whole thing is show business. And it's show business, not just for the Ukrainians, but for Americans too. To think now this is settled down and they'll go into the EU and how wonderful that will be. And oh, by the way, we have a little treaty sitting in Obama's office that they're negotiating for us to also unite with the European Union. Three amigos have a lot to talk about in Mexico, according to the USA Today. They're talking about getting back on board what's called the North American Union, which is regionalizing the Western Hemisphere under the leadership of the United States to be one of those thirds of this three regional problem. In the same way, with U.S. Army seeks better ties with China's military out of the New York Times. You see, it's not enough that China is out there being belligerent all over the Pacific. Now we're going to get in bed with them and be nice guys over this. You see, at the top, it will be controlled. These three regions will be fighting one another, but at the top, it will be controlled. I don't know if you've noticed it in the last several months, last year or so, but Obama's getting rid of an awful lot of generals and admirals and replacing them with people that love the New World Order. These things are a problem. It fits a pattern. So when you see these things, you can tie them all together into the master plan of the New World Order, of the world being divided into three parts, and they're just manipulating people to embrace this program for a variety of reasons. Some, with us, it's free trade, for instance. That is the mantra for regionalizing the United States into the North American Union and then possibly with the European Union. But at any rate, it will be divided into thirds. 1/3 Chinese, 1/3 Russian, and 1/3 American. And they'll get us all warring one another so that in the name of patriotism, we'll stand still for anything within our own country in the name of the war effort. And that is the master plan. Don't ever forget. And one other thing that is a primary goal. They actually have two goals, these individuals. One is a new world order, and the second is the elimination of religion completely, unless it is controlled by the state. This has been the pattern and the aims of these individuals since 1776 in Europe. Until next week, we'll see you then.